Hi there, my name is Patrick Denny and welcome to this video presentation about Colchester Castle and other Norman buildings. We're going to begin by talking about Colchester Castle itself in some detail, and then we're going to move on to talk briefly about St John's Abbey that was, and then we'll finish up by looking at the ruins of St Butterell's Priory. So without further ado, let me move on to my first slide and we'll get the presentation underway. And this is another one of those lovely drawings by Peter Frost. And it's a depiction or a reconstruction of Norman Colchester circa 1200. And we can see the castle sat right here. If we come to the west end of the town where the Balkan Gateway is, we can see that the road no longer runs there. That's been closed up probably during the late Roman period. So the high street, where originally would have started at the Balkan Gateway, now starts where it does now at the top of North Hill in junction with Head Street and goes right down. We can also see on the right here St Butterell's Priory and St John's Abbey, which we'll come back to later. But I just want to close in a little bit on the castle itself. Now this castle, the image that you can see has been depicted probably as a three-storey building. We'll come to that later, don't worry too much about that. We can see the little Bayley Chapel, and we can see this this hall building, which was discovered here back in the 1940s, I believe. Interestingly, it shows a bank going all the way around here. And don't forget, these drawings, these reconstructions have been based on current knowledge, archaeology, source material, and what have you. At the moment, we only have part of that bank, probably from about this point, going right along the top here. It also shows a ditch going all the way around as well. So although we've still got, or we know beyond this north bank, we know there was a ditch there where we've still got the flower borders there. But originally, of course, the ditch would have extended right round the entire castle, even round towards the high street. And you can see on this illustration, because the ditch goes round into the high street, it's pushed these houses lining this side of the high street to form a little bend here in front of the castle. Now we can see other maps with that on, and one of the earliest maps, or the earliest bird's eye view of Colchester, was that by John Speed, 1610. And I say we're only going to focus on the castle at the moment, but obviously there's the Roman wall running all the way around here. It shows many churches. It shows wells. There's a little circle there, and that is Stanwell, and of course that is Stanwell Street. Lots of fascinating detail in this map if you get time to have a look at it. But if we look at the castle and we go in close, again we can see the ditch, part of the ditch coming round by the high street here, and there's even little footbridges, look, for people to cross that ditch. In this image, it also shows some of the four buildings, and part of the curtain wall, which was still standing obviously at the time. As to the castle itself, we could say, well, look, it shows the castle complete with all the towers on before it got shortened in height. But of course, this is very much, in this particular case anyway, a stylized version of a castle. I know in Speed's maps, they're not all the same, but this one, we know straight away the door's not in the right place for one thing. It should be right over on the left-hand side. So we couldn't pay too much attention to this, but the ditch is interesting. It shows the ditch being there. And of course, if we look at a Colchester from above, if we look at, this is a Google Maps, a recent one from 2021, we can see first sight here, we can see the castle, but the high street, which should, you know, following the Roman line, should have been a straight road. You can see you've got this big Pudney bend where medieval builders, because the ditch had forced them to move out, they've had to build round the ditch. So that's the reason why the high street is the shape that it is in. So here we are at Colchester Castle. And what can we, well, we can say quite a few things about this. I'm just going to mention a few things and tell you some of the questions that I hope to answer. First and foremost, it's the largest Norman keep, certainly in Britain, probably in Normandy as well, in floor, a sheer floor area. And it's, as you know from our last talk, it's built over the remains of the Roman temple podium. And that, so many things really, I'm sure, dictated the size of the keep. If our temple podium had been half the size, we may have had a half the size castle. But being short of building materials in this region, you know, not only the Romans, Normans, medieval church builders, when the Normans came, they found a Roman town, probably mainly in ruins, and they were able to rob and reuse and recycle. And not only did they recycle buildings to build the structure, I mean, the structure of the building that we're looking at is probably 90% recycled Roman buildings, but they also put the castle on top of the great temple podium, hence its great size. It's almost identical in design to the White Tower. Many Norman castles have what they call sister towers. So, for example, Hedingham and Rochester are sister towers, and the same Colchester and the White Tower at the Tower of London. Both buildings are believed to have been designed by Bishop Gandolf of Rochester. Both of them probably started in the very late 1060s or the early 1070s. Not exactly sure, but it's probably, I mean, the old borough records in Colchester give a date at 1076. Now, of course, that could be true, but it seems as though it could have been a few years earlier. Certainly in the 1070s, probably, maybe the first half of that decade. You'll notice, as you look at the building, you can see, if you look on this tower here sticking out, you've got these limestone coins up the side here, and you can see them going up here, and they stop just over halfway. Same here. And then when it gets to this point, there's an abrupt change. It changes to Roman brick. And the higher you go, the worse it gets. Something dramatic happened there, and we'll have a look at that later on as well. We need to discuss what the tree's doing on top of the castle. People often ask what that's doing up there. We'll have a look at that. Also, why is the door of Cogsta Castle on the ground floor? Now, I know it looks like it's on the first floor, but don't forget, this has all been dug out, these foundations. So even in, you know, the early part of the 20th century, you just walked almost in at ground level into the door. And of course, it wasn't until about the 18th century that what we call the vaults and the stairway was actually uncovered. So basically, as far as the Normans were concerned, that was the ground floor. And with most Norman castles, and I think Colchester could be the exception, that you always go in at first floor level. So the door should be here. And we'll talk about that later on. And of course, the other thing we've got to have to discuss is how tall was the castle? You know, was it built as it is now? Was there 3 stories? Was there 4 stories? That's another thing that we're going to discuss as we go through the talk. So here we've got the White Tower. I'm sure you've all been there, and the entrance level is at what we might call first floor. And this floor under here is the basement story, if you like. So you've got the basement, first floor, second, third. So it's got 3 floors basically, plus a basement. And then you've got these high walls going up to the crenellations. And if we put Colchester next to it, we can see it falls quite far short. This is about 4 or 5 feet above what we might call second story. And don't forget, we haven't got a basement. So again, we need to try and see if we can find some questions and answer what happened there. Just to show you the sheer size of Colchester compared with the tower, these 2 plans are both to the same scale. This is the Tower of London on the right, and there's Colchester. Very similar. They've both got a stairway here. They've both got a spiral staircase there. The Tower of London's got an extra one that we haven't got over here. The tower's got one large cross wall going along here because it's a very wide gap to span. But Colchester, being nearly half again as large as the Tower of London in floor space, has 2 cross walls. And of course, this one's gone. But we've still got this little cross wall here. Now, let's have a look, and we'll come back to that. I haven't forgotten about that. We'll discuss that as we go. But let's have a look at the east wall of the castle to start with. And this looks a bit more like a Norman castle. You've got the original windows here, but again, you've got this same scenario where up to a certain point, you've got limestone on these coins or corners of these pilasters here, buttresses, and then it turns to brick. And you can see the material generally tends to get worse the higher you go. This little addition here was added by Charles Gray when he owned the castle in the 18th century. But if we go closer, let's have a close look, because right in the centre of that wall, you've got a whole row of Roman bricks, which are not lying horizontal as they normally might be, but they're all standing up. And it's what we call a soldier course. And if you look around the castle, they almost go around the whole building at that level. It's almost as though they found a source of bricks from a certain place at that level. Now, these bricks that you can see standing up began their life as part of underfloor central heating systems in Roman buildings. So these were the hypercourse bricks that were suspended. The floor of Roman buildings was suspended on these stacks of bricks. These bricks could be 2 or 3 feet in height, all joined together, about a metre or so apart, and warm air from the hypercourse fluids would be circulating under the building, coming up through the walls and so on and so forth. So there we've got warm air central heating. So the Normans, not only were they pulling down probably Roman buildings from the roof downwards, but in some cases they were even going under floor level and digging up these hypercourse stacks. And Philip Crummy, for one, has suggested possibly that because there's so many of them at this level, could they have come from the bathhouse that we haven't found? Maybe we're not going to find it because maybe we're looking at it in the walls of the castle, partly anyway. And it's interesting that we even know a little bit about how they did this. So imagine the Roman builders digging down, finding these stacks of bricks, and picking up a stack of bricks. I mean, they've been quite heavy, taking them up onto the scaffold, and they didn't even bother to separate one brick from another, before they recycled them. They just, if you can imagine, they just picked up a stack of bricks and twisted it round and just put it in the wall. And then they picked up another stack, twisted it round, put it in the wall, and so on and so forth. And people sometimes think, well, how do you know that? Well, we know that because most of these bricks have still got the Roman mortar stuck to them. And it's only where you get a cluster of bricks joining another cluster do you get a bit of Norman mortar. And it's distinctive. It's very distinctive between the Norman, which is much more limey, and the Roman, which is more like we would equate with concrete, if you like. So that tells us two things. It's evidence of this recycling process, but it also tells us something about some of the Romans who lived in Colchester. They enjoyed warm air central heating. And there's the little arrow just pointing it out to you. And that's what it looked like. I'm sure you've seen illustrations before, but those are the bricks from that situation that we can see in our castle wall. So let's just have a quick talk about this ground floor doorway. So we've got a ground floor doorway. We've also got one at first floor level that's been blocked up round the back, but let's stick on this one for a moment. Let's look at just a few examples. The Tower of London has got a first floor entrance. Hedingham Castle has got a first floor entrance. Rochester has got a first floor entrance. So why has Colchester got a ground floor one? Well, the answer is we don't know 100%, but I'll give you a few suggestions as to why that might be the case. And we need to go back to the east wall of the castle. And so there's those bricks, look, running all the way along here that we just spoke about. You see those? That is a toilet chute. That's a garderobe chute. And there's half a dozen of those around the castle wall, which you can walk around and find. They're in mainly in little dark little corridors, and very dark in there, of course. And presumably that's why there's a little window there to let some light into the little room. And when you go inside the castle, of course, it's just a stone slab with a hole in, and you can look down and see the grass, if you like. But let me just zoom in a bit closer. And I want to show you, so just remind you again, here you've got these limestone bricks here, look, going up either side here, for example, and then it suddenly changes to brick. So something happened there. Maybe they lost their supply of stone for some reason all of a sudden. But anyway, what I want you to look at, can you see these little clusters of bricks? There's a little cluster there. There's a little cluster of red bricks there. There's a bit of a cluster there, and so on. And they are the former battlements of the castle when it was first built. So you need to imagine this is the top of the castle. That bit didn't exist. None of this existed. The castle finished here to start with, and there were battlements. You know what I mean? Battlements running all the way along here. And there's been various arguments as to why that might have happened. I'll just come back to that in a moment. But when they did start building again, and it could have been 10 years later, it could have been 6 years later, we don't know. But when they did start building again, obviously their lovely supply of stone had gone. Maybe that had been gone to build St John's Abbey or something, we don't know. So they're reduced to using red brick. And they've filled in, so there's one of the battlements, if you like, and they filled these battlements in with the red brick to square it all nicely off and then continue building. Now, this isn't new knowledge. People have known about this for a long time. In fact, in the 1940s, a man called Kenneth Scarth did a few drawings, and my slide has got stuck. Let's try doing this system. There it is, a drawing showing the formal battlements on the east wall at first floor level by Kenneth Scarth. And since then, of course, there have been more modern drawings made. And if you look outside the castle, there's even the display board now with one of the more modern ones. But you can clearly see, you know, there was a battlement here. And it works out perfectly in line, look, with where this big change took place. Now, this is something you can research yourself, and I'll give you some advice right at the end. But the castle, we think, started, shall we say, in the first half of the decade of the 1070s. We know that in about 1076, there was a Danish revolt. It could have caused a halt. In 1085, there was a great belief that Canute of Denmark was going to invade England. And it may have been that all the castles, although Cogsta Castle may only have been half built, they'd only finished up to the first floor level. It was like a ground floor building, a bungalow building. Maybe they decided to put it in a state of readiness for war. It may be that a bit later, when King William died, William the Conqueror died in 1087, maybe the new king didn't want to spend all that money. We don't know. Something happened. Maybe they ran out of money. But the interesting thing is, a very similar thing happened to the Tower of London. There was a cessation of building on the Tower of London for some period round about this time as well. So more research needs to be done, but there's a couple of theories which I'll put to you there. And here we've got a couple of drawings. It's possible the original intention was the one at the top here. Maybe Cogsta Castle was designed to look like the Tower of London. You know, 4 stories, including the basement, maybe. But we know that the early castle, at least, looks something like this. It would have been quite a funny building. So we could answer that. There's one easy way we could answer the question, why was the door of Cogsta Castle on the ground floor? Because we didn't have a first floor. How could we put the door at the first floor level if the first floor wasn't there? So it may be that the door was put at the ground floor level here. I say because there was no ground floor. When they started building again, we'll call it phase 2, they could have put the door in the first floor level at that time, couldn't they? I know they put one at that level round the back, but you know, it may be that there was something to do with the inner walls and that made it difficult for them to do that. And it's also unlikely the door we've got now was the original one. The original, when they first built the castle, there had been a smaller door there. And if you look underneath the drawbridge, you can still see the little landing stage leading up to what had been a smaller door. The door that we've got now was probably inserted there at phase 2, because the architecture is, you know, about 1100, something like that, or 1090s. It's later. So it's an interesting thing. Also, as you walk in the castle through the door now with the chevron moulding, if you look up, you can see the slot for a portcullis, which never was added as far as we know. What we're looking at now are talking about the height of the castle now, and we still haven't totally resolved it. Back in 1922, look, they had these illustrations in guidebooks showing that's what Cogsta Castle is like now, but that's what was intended to be. And I was looking at a guidebook for 1966 just recently, and they were still saying in there that it was originally a 4-storey building and 3 stories have been knocked down. If we look at Peter Frost's model here, again, that's showing you a 4-storey building. It's interesting, in Peter Frost, he's got the chapel here, look, the little chapel, and he's also got this little feature here, and they've got it on this one down here as well, look, and that's called a Barbican. And a Barbican was an extra defence to protect the door, particularly in Colchester's case, because the door was on ground floor level. It would definitely have needed extra protection. So they had this Barbican, and as you'll see in a moment, there was also other defences further out as well. So there was quite a lot of defences to protect that weak point, which wouldn't have been weak if the door had been put up where it should have been. So there's just a few examples. This illustration you're looking at here actually shows a 2-storey building, much the same as what we've got now, but just with height and towers, maybe an extra floor, a small floor in the tower area, but basically a 2-storey building. So that's shall we say, the modern theory, but some people still believe it was a 3-storey building. I don't think many people now believe it ever reached to a 4-storey building. But we have some more evidence. Now, you may have seen this. This is a view of Colchester. This is probably the earliest view we have of Colchester, 1588. And it shows Colchester with its Roman wall, everybody packed inside the town. I mean, it stayed much like that until the Victorian period and beyond. These are the suburbs, if you like. This is East Gate, so that's a little way up East Hill. It's been shown here. This is the river. Footbridge. There was only a footbridge over that river until the early 1800s. And then this pale coloured line here is presumably the town ditch running around the outside. Now, it's not entirely accurate. I mean, these bastions are not the right number. I think the churches are slightly out as well. But the interesting thing is, look, up the hill on the right-hand side, it shows the castle. And it's in the right place. So he must have seen it there. It shows a bank, or a green bank all the way around, which we would have had, although the way he's drawn that looks like the castle sitting on top of it. But, you know, 1588, and it wasn't until the late 17th century that Cogsta Castle started to lose its height, when it was knocked down a bit. I'll come to that in a moment. But it looks like a 2-storey building. It also shows this curtain wall. We saw a bit of it in Speed's time, a little bit there, but it seems to go right around here a little bit, a little curtain wall there. But the interesting thing is, right or wrong, this castle doesn't tower over and above the churches, look. Now, if it was a 4-storey building, you know, that's obviously higher, so he's drawn that higher. But some of that church there, they all look about the same. So we can't dismiss this entirely. I'll just show you one or two. This was, as you can see down the bottom, all these pictures were published by Wheatley and Ashby, and one or two others actually. This one was in 1879. You can get it online. I think on Google Books there's a free version if you want to have a look at it. But there's quite a few views. Here's a couple more that are in the book. This is Rochester, but look at Rochester Castle. It shows a tall, towering building, towering over these houses and even the church almost. And the Tower of London, again, towering way high above these houses and things like this. So remember, Colchester doesn't. So that may add weight to the fact that Colchester Castle has never been significantly higher than what it is today. And this is this is from a recent book, which I'm going to talk about right at the end, based on a conference in Norwich in 2012. And this picture was presented. And this picture was presented to the Society of Antiquaries of London in 1721. And by that time, it was probably already an old drawing. And one thing we do know about Colchester Castle, which has been recorded, is that the roof fell in, the main roof fell in 1637. So if you look up here, first of all, the northeast tower, this is where Gray had his little office. It looks like a roof there, looks like a bit of a roof going there, but also it's clearly a roof going all the way along over what would be the main hall with a chimney. There's one roof you can see here. There probably would have been two on that south side. So the thing is, this picture may well date before 1637, before we know the roof's collapsed. But what you can see here, it's a two-storey building. So maybe we never did have that extra floor, third floor, or even the extra 2 floors. What about these foundations then in front of the castle? Well, we've already touched on some of them. First of all, this one here is the foundations of this, what we now call the Bayley Chapel. This chapel was already standing before the castle was built. And when the castle was built, the chapel was rebuilt with it. It may have been a little old timber building perhaps, but it was rebuilt at the same time as the castle. And the orientation, because in the chapel inside the castle and the chapel here, they're on a slightly different easterly orientation. So why would they have left that there? If the Normans were building a castle, they're worried about defences. Come over to this other illustration. They built the Barbican there. Why have that? Surely that would give the enemy something to hide behind or to gain advantage from. We don't know. But the thing is, it must have had some religious significance or something for the Normans to have kept it there. It must have been an important Saxon chapel. And that's why they rebuilt it and allowed it to remain. So that accounts for those foundations, that end. There's a little apsidal end which you can't see from this view. And then you've got these other foundations here. We have to just turn around to look at those. So this is the foundation of that Barbican I told you about. Remember that Barbican right close up to the door. And that would have gone right up, covering the door. And rather than having the door, an entranceway right in front of the door, they've kind of made it difficult for the attacker. They've got to go round here. And all the time, the top of that Barbican would have been open and they can be pouring hot oil or blocks of stone on your head or what have you. But you've also got this other outer defence, look, which is not always seen on some of the drawings, with these little arrow windows here. And that goes along here all the way right round the other side. And if we look from the other end, so there's our little Barbican bit, but what you've got here, these appear to be circular. So there could have been a tower there, and there's another circular tower here before it goes in a bit and then goes along. So it comes along, comes out here, comes out and then goes back in again. The ground level is a bit of a problem. I mean, it's beyond the time I've got to even discuss. The ground level has been up and down from Romans to Normans and sort of back again. But what I can show you is another interesting drawing by Kenneth Scarfe. I think this appeared in a history of the castle from the 1960s. But what he's done, he's kind of explained it quite well, I think, because there's the little chapel. You can't actually see the Barbican bit, it's at the back there, but what you can see is this wall coming along and then coming out with these two towers, if you like, and then going around the other side. Not sure what this is supposed to be here, but there was certainly quite a lot protecting that ground floor doorway. Now, the footbridge that we've got now to let us into the castle goes across here, of course. Well, it wasn't until the early 1930s that they actually dug out these foundations. And as a result of that, they left them there as they were, and that they added the footbridge so that we can get easy access to the castle. And this is what the castle was like immediately prior to that. So what you literally did, you went in here and just walked in. So there was no, you know, it really was on the ground floor, shall we say. Okay, now I just want to share something with you, which you may mention to people if you take friends or groups around the castle. Right in front of the castle is this sound bench. It was part of a heritage lottery bid by Essex Record Office in 2016. They're called sound benches. They eventually put about 8 or more around Essex, and Colchester was the very first one. And we begged and we got the prime position right in front of the castle rather than down by the Burton Lake somewhere or somewhere out of sight. And on this sound bench, you can see there's a little group there. It opened up in June 2016, so it's about 5 years old. And I did some figures. I went, this is the little machine that you push the buttons. And I went there the other day and it's had about 104,000 hits. So people have clicked those buttons 104,000 times to listen to what we've got on there. And you've got 2 buttons. There's one there, that's the left-hand one and the right-hand one. On the left-hand button, you'll hear a little bit about the history of the castle, mainly. And on the right-hand side, you'll hear memories of people dating back to before the First World War, some of them, and later, about what the park meant for them, how they used to play in the park. One lady says, that was our summer holiday. Father only got a week off, and Mum used to make some sandwiches up, and all us kids used to go up the park, and that was our holiday. So, and people used to play, skipping was a main thing, skipping in the park every Easter. Virtually every girl and young woman in Colchester went over the park with giant skipping rope. This is all on there if you want to listen to it. But what I'm going to do, let me just introduce, yeah, this is a view I took of 2 people sitting on there. Whether they knew the sound was on, I hope they did, because what they're looking at is the Emma and Grimes display. And we put memories of people who remembered these tramps on there so you could listen to them. But these 2 characters here, now this gentleman on the left is the late Don Scott. He trained as a tourist guide when I did in the late 1980s, and he passed away recently. And this is Jackie Barber. She's there because her memories are also on one of these buttons here. But what I'd like to do, in only a couple of minutes, I thought you might like to hear Don Scott talking about the castle before the footbridge was put on there. So let's hope this works.
I remember well going to the castle, visiting the castle right through my childhood. My earliest positive memories must date back to when I was, I should think, 7 years old, and that would be 1933. And this was at the time when there were excavations going on in front of the castle, and this area in front here, which is commonly called the moat nowadays, wasn't of course a moat at all. It was an archaeological excavation, and it was so important that it was left open for the public to see. Now, before the excavation took place, the ground used to slope right up to the castle doorway. But once the excavation took place, of course, there was a hole in front of the castle, and to get into the castle you had to go down a staircase into the so-called moat area and up again into the castle by a staircase. And at that time, the main courtyard of the castle, where the main part of the museum now stands, was open to the sky. There was no roof on it. That was put in, I believe, about 1934. And I well remember standing at the edge of that courtyard at a railing which was at the end of the present passageway inside the castle, and looking into the open space in front of me, which was covered with, where the walls were covered with foliage, creepers and so on, and it was more like a garden than a castle building.
Okay, so that's something, if you're taking people around and there's no one sitting there, you can actually play that part of that message for them. I think it's quite interesting. So what about the tree on top of the castle? Well, it's a sycamore, and according to local tradition, it was planted in 1815 to commemorate the Battle of Waterloo. And it's basically been there almost ever since. The tradition, one of the traditions says that it was planted by the mayor of the day, assisted by his young daughter. Another theory that I've heard from a gentleman who used to work in the castle, he's no longer there, but he believed, and he was doing some research on this, that it was planted by the man who used to keep homing pigeons on top of the castle. Yeah, and this man who kept homing pigeons apparently was part of Lord Rothschild's network of pigeon keepers, because the way Lord Rothschild, who was a financial, big noise in the city, in order for him to keep up to date with the financial markets in Europe, he used to send messages back by carrier pigeons and also by ship captains coming in and out. But that's just another little theory. But anyway, it stayed there until the late 1980s, when some of you may remember there was a big job. There was scaffolding put all the way around the castle, and repair work had to be done. And they found that the roots of this tree were literally growing out the brickwork. It was destroying the masonry. So they decided to lift it off. So they brought a crane in. They kept the root ball, everything nice and safe. They took it off the castle, kept it down in what were then the nurseries, down towards the bottom of the park where the play area is now. And for about a year, while all the repair work was done, and then they replanted it. And by now they'd planted it in a giant concrete pot, which was about 6 or 7 feet square, 6 or 7 feet deep. And they hoisted that up on top of the castle. And not only that, it was given its own automatic watering system. If you go up on the castle and make your way into the chapel, you'll see on your left that it's boarded up, but there's like a little tank there, little cistern. And it runs water down a pipe on a solenoid valve. It's all timed. And if you look around the tree, there's like a little MDE plastic pipe with holes in that continues to water the tree. In line with the tradition of the original mayor planting the tree, Bob Russell and his daughter Nicola, he was mayor at the time in 1987, and he took part in the ceremony of putting the tree back again. You may find the odd photograph from the Edwardian period or somewhere without the tree there, but I believe they've actually been doctored. But let me just tell you a bit more about this here. Now, so there it is. You can see its pot. You can see the big pot here, full of foliage. Now, sometime in the 1990s, I can't remember the exact date, but it might have been 93, 94, something like that. And this is when I was guiding up on the roof of the castle with the other guides, and we'd come up the stairs and we'd stand here telling people about the tree. And we noticed there was a mallard duck nesting right here. And the male duck, the drake, was usually walking around the roof somewhere. And you'd have a whole group there. And this duck didn't flinch. And she was sitting on 13 eggs. And all of those eggs hatched. Now, when they hatch, within an hour or so, or even less, these ducklings are all running around. And 4 of the ducklings decided, for some reason, to run this way or that way, this way here. And they fell down the gap between the concrete pot and the wall. There's a gap of about 12 inches, 14 inches. And they fell down there. And the attendants come up and managed to hook them out. The other 9 decided to run this way. And of course, they ran off the building, 45 feet up in the air. And I'd love to have seen it with a camera, but these 9 ducklings floating down to the ground. And of course, birds and ducks, they've got like air sacs in their bones that they can almost sort of float and glide down. And that's what happened. When they landed, the mother duck flew down there with them. And one of the young girls who worked in reception in the castle at the time, she's not there now, but she told me a little while later, she said, I was on duty when this happened. And we heard this commotion going on. I went outside and these ducks had all come off. And she says 8 of them seemed to be okay. And the mother duck was taking them, I think she took them to what is the fish pond now, nearby. She said, but one of these little ducklings must have hit the wall a few times on the way down. And she says this poor little duckling with its wing up in the air was going round and round in circles backwards. And she thought, oh my goodness, I've got to put it out of its misery. And then she thought, well, I can't. How do I do it? In the end, she couldn't. She decided, she said, I picked up this little fluttering duckling and I took it back into the museum, put it in a little box, tissue paper and all the rest of it. And that night I took it home, she said, and I looked after it for 2 or 3 days. And after about 3 days, she said that had fully recovered. And I took it back to the castle. And by that time, all the ducklings had been taken down to, the mother had taken them down to the boating pond and it joined them down there. And then before long, of course, mother duck decides to nest again. So she came, and this became a regular thing year after year. And what the attendants did, all of a sudden we saw plastic washing up bowls appearing here with water in for the ducks. And I don't know whether you can see it, but there's some chicken wire. They put chicken wire all the way around the outside to stop the little ducklings falling down, but that still didn't work. They still managed to fall down. And I don't know while you've been watching this, whether you've realized there's actually a duck nesting here right now. Did you spot it? She's over here, look. There she is, sitting over here with her little ducklings. And of course, they still kept falling down. And Martin, who's one of the slimmest of the attendants ever, he usually got the job of trying to hoik these little ducklings out. And I remember at the time, Leslie Hewer used to be a journalist on the Standard. And I was telling her about this. And I asked if she knew about it. And she said, oh, no. She says, let me know if it happens again and we'll get a photographer up. And of course, that year, the duck never came back again. And they found, I think they found a dead duck in the park. Maybe the fox had finally caught up with her. But anyway, that's the story I can tell you about the tree. There's no written evidence to my knowledge. I have tried. I've looked in the old newspapers that were about at the time. The Ipswich Journal, Chelmsford Chronicle. I'd have thought if the mayor had done something, surely it would have, you know, resulted in a paragraph. All I wanted was today the mayor planted the tree would have been, but nothing. But what we do have is what you're looking at now. And I think that's quite encouraging. We do have some good pictorial evidence. This picture here was published in 1825 by Thomas Cromwell, his History of Colchester. So this picture can't be later than that. It might even be 1824. But let's say it's 1825. That's only 10 years after Waterloo. Now, people will say it's a sycamore tree. It's a self-sown seed. And I could agree to some extent because I've got them in my garden. We get hundreds of them. But my argument against that would be, why don't you ever see any other sycamores or anything else anywhere around the castle walls? You only see the tree where it is. And you've got to ask yourself, whoever drew this picture, why would he put the tree there if he couldn't see it? He must have looked up and seen that picture. So we thought that was good. And then we found an earlier one. Now this is from about 1818. This is from Wright's History of Essex, Wright with a W, 2-volume, Wright's History of Essex. And here, the castle. And what do you see in the right place? The tree. Nothing else anywhere around. So that's not bad. That's only 36 months after Waterloo. And we thought that was it. And then we found an earlier one. And this is actually dated. It's a map dated June 1817. 24 months after Waterloo. What do you see? I know it's kind of grown a bit, but what do you see in the right place? The tree. So I think the pictorial evidence that we've got is pretty convincing to me that it's certainly been there since 1817. Why not 1815? The next picture I'm going to show you, the last one, shows you a picture of Cogsta Castle before Waterloo. Now, of course, we don't want to see a tree there because that would spoil everything, wouldn't it? So this is Ben Strutt's History of Colchester and 1803 and no tree. So I'll leave that with you. We better crash on. So we mentioned earlier that the castle has got a wealth of Roman materials and it sits on top of the temple podium. We've seen this in one of our other talks about the Roman temple. And this giant podium here with the steps leading up, rather than being a solid structure, the Romans had created it because of the shortage of stone in this area. They've come up with a way of making much use of sand and gravel, which we have a lot of in Colchester. This is the well house on the right, and beyond that, the gate opens up and it takes you down to what we now call, it would be the basement of the castle, or we now call it the Roman vaults. And you'll notice that during World War II, this was an air raid shelter for people living in the town centre area. When I should take, I don't do much in the castle now, but one of the things, when you take a group of people down in the castle, you've got this lovely temple model with the front, you've got the steps, but you can unhinge it and fold the steps down so you can see the vaults. And there's sand in there as well. So that's to let people know that there's, you know, they were full of sand, basically. And one of the first things I usually say to people when they're under, because they get a bit disorientated going down under there, and I say, well, the first thing I'm going to tell you exactly where you are. And then I walk over here and I say, look, you're standing here in there, where that sand is, that's where you are now. And I also say, look, you're standing in these vaults, and they can see them, you can see it here. And I say, look, before you leave, please go and touch the wall. I want you to touch these stones, because you will then be touching the first stone and mortar building of any size in Britain. I'm not talking about Stonehenge or the little stone huts up in the Orkneys. Colchester Castle would have been the last stone and mortar building, the first one ever constructed in Britain, and it's such a joy to have it. We've still got it here. You can proceed through the vaults and you can tell the story. These are some of the older displays, but they work quite well. Here we've got the Romans preparing the foundation. So they've dug down here about 13 feet. All of the sand they've taken out, rather than discarding, they've piled it up all the way along here and all the way along here. They've used wooden boarding, shuttering, so it doesn't collapse. And once they were happy with that, they would then fill all these trenches with concrete and cover over to maybe a foot or so above the top here. And that was their foundation. There was no windows, no doors, no human being was ever meant to go down there. And then they built their temple on top of it. You'll notice these heavy columns, they didn't put them in the center here, because they knew you don't want to put much there, because that's a very, very weak point. They put them along here. Now, of course, fast forward to the Normans, when William the Conqueror comes and he builds his great castle at Colchester, and this was owned by the Crown for centuries, really, but not realizing that, I mean, see, in reality, although it looks from the outside this was a stone foundation, about 2/3 of it was sand. But it worked. Providing the sand was still in there, it was no problem. But when the Normans came, they didn't realize that, so they built their castle. Luckily, they put it around the outside of the podium, these massive walls. But these two heavy cross walls, which would have weighed probably thousands of tons, look where they put them. The weakest point they could possibly have found. They would never have done that had they realized that we could spend all this money on the King's Castle and the whole thing is going to collapse on us. Well, fast forward again to 1683, a man called John Wheely, a Colchester ironmonger, first of all leased the castle, and then in 1684 he purchased it, we're told, for £110, for the sole purpose of pulling it down and using the building materials for building and making money and profit. And during this work, Philip Morant actually says that Wheely used gunpowder to blow down some of the walls of the castle. What he didn't say is how much. Did he take a story off, 2 stories, 6 feet, just the towers? We don't really know. But we do know, probably, that during blowing up and pulling down some of these high towers and then crashing down 50 or more feet onto the top of these arches here, one of them broke open. And Wheely, the first man since the Romans, discovered they were full of sand. You could almost imagine his men saying, come here, look at this. Now, we don't know what he thought. Maybe maybe he broke it open, made it bigger. Maybe he got some sticks and pushed down. My goodness, that's going down and down. But for whatever reason, he stopped pulling down the castle. Thank goodness, because if not, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. And he dug a tunnel right the way through, 17 feet of Norman Castle and 5 feet of Roman Temple, 22 feet altogether, to get the sand out. And in the end, he had to give up. He lost money on it. The question is, why did he go to all that trouble? Well, some people say, well, he wanted the sand. Well, yeah, there would have been a market for sand. But, you know, Colchester sits on a big heap of sand. He could have dug a hole anywhere and probably got his sand. But it's possible. Other people have thought, and maybe he did, maybe he thought this was some great, because they knew the importance of the site, Roman temple, maybe some great British king was buried here. Maybe they were going to find all the burial goods and the gold and the treasure. But of course, there was nothing there. Or perhaps, you know, he may have been a clever engineer. Maybe he thought, if I take all that sand out and put my gunpowder down there, maybe I can undermine the whole building in one fell swoop. We don't know, really, but we do know that that's what happened. The tunnel was done, and he took most of the sand out. The rest of the sand was taken out much later. This is a picture of Wheatley's tunnel inside the castle. So you can, it's 22 feet. It's a solid wall at the end. You can't go anywhere. Even if you did break through the wall, you then have to tunnel up about 4 feet to break through the lawn at the back of the castle. There is a little sign here, look. You need to mind your heads if you go in here. But it says Norman Castle wall, 17 feet thick that way, Roman temple this way. But the interesting thing you've got is a straight butt joint. They didn't attempt to try and tie the buildings in like you might try and, if you're building an extension at home, you'll tie it into your house. Well, this isn't going anywhere. So you've got a straight butt joint running all the way down, and we wouldn't have seen that if it hadn't been for Wheatley digging that tunnel. In this view, standing a bit further back, using the light I've got there, this is interesting. There's the tunnel going off to the left. Here, look, you see these lines there, there, there. That's the original shuttering, the wooden shuttering that the Romans had shuttered these trenches up with, and the wood has simply rotted away. And elsewhere, you'll see post holes where the wood has gone, and you've got this funny indentation. We know also, this is interesting, that Roman ground level is here. That's Roman ground level. Now you need to go in the castle and have a close look at this, but and the reason we know it's ground level, everything below that is poured concrete, shall we say. If you're digging a foundation for an extension at your house, you dig down 3 feet, you pour concrete in up to ground level, and when that goes off, you start laying your bricks. And that's what the Romans have done. That is poured concrete, but from that level on, every single brick has been laid one at a time. So that tells you that's ground. So in actual fact, they've taken it out beyond what they should have done. And this one, I'm sort of lying on my back here, but this is looking up at the roof here. So there is the Norman, this is the Norman Castle bit here. This is the Roman, and you can clearly see these Roman tiles or bricks, look, which have been added into the temple foundation. And just here on that tile, there's a little half moon figure. I'll blow it up a bit. It's almost like somebody with their finger has made a mark. That had to be done when that brick was still wet, straight after it was made, by the maker probably. Maybe he put his mark on so he knew that he'd get paid for so many bricks or whatever the case may be. But when you go down there and you rub your finger around there, you're sort of connecting with someone who did that nearly 2,000 years ago. And here we've got, in 1922, they opened up the tunnels again from the outside. There's a view from the inside looking out. I know timber's quite strong when you put it on edge like that, but I'm not sure how much weight that would actually carry. But anyway, that was excavated in 1922, and I think that's when they took the excess of the sand and the soil out. Here we've got a view of the east wall of the castle in the 18th century. This is Charles Gray, probably This may have been just before he acquired it or just about the same time as he acquired it. And then we've got another lovely view here, which is in his history of Colchester in 1748. And this is supposed to be Charles Gray here showing his friend, Philip Morant, and the historian William Stukeley around basically what was his giant folly in his garden. And of course, this has all been given to him by his mother-in-law, Mary Webster, and the castle lands to butt up to his holly trees home. And this was the little dome that he put over the great stairway. You can see some of these windows have been enlarged because that's where he had his library. And that's the little tower he put on. This was his study. But so basically it may just be that that's the original height of the castle apart from the towers. Maybe the towers went up, an extra little story. That seems to be the case that's emerging. The great stairway is interesting. This is called a newel stair or a spiral staircase. And it's the largest spiral staircase in Britain. And that's every castle, church and cathedral, in that it's 16 feet in diameter. 16 feet in diameter. And like most spiral stairs, it goes up in a clockwise fashion, which gave a right-handed swordsman a better chance if he's defending it against a right-handed attacker. There are one or two left-handed staircases. There's one Smailholm Tower in the borders of Scotland, which is a later castle to this, but they have got left-handed anti-clockwise spiral stairs, and they were the Keir family. And they reckon that's where this Keir cack-handed comes from, because they were left-handed, father and sons, and their castle was built with anti-clockwise spiral staircases. And if you've been to Hever Castle, they've got one of each. They've got a right-handed and a left-handed spiral stair. But this went up to the floors of the castle. On the roof, of course, this is the chapel area. And if you look, originally there was just two low-pitch roofs running along here, which were cleaned out and excavated in the 1980s. And rather than putting a low roof back, they put this elevated one so people can actually come in here if you like. They've even had a wedding up here in my memory. I remember they had a wedding. This floor, they were hoping when they took the old roofs off, they might find the original floor of the chapel, Norman Chapel. But what they found, and although it's since been relaid, this is the floor that Charles Gray put down when he was doing his renovations. But interestingly, talking about the height of the building, if you look over here, look, that appears to be a wall 4 or 5 feet high of what might have been the third story. What is that doing there? And if we just go a bit closer, look, and you've got these buttresses going up, all designed to take a load. Now this, was this part of a wall? Is this as far as Wheelie got down when he was pulling down maybe from a third story? Or is this part of the wall, a short wall that the roof was somehow fixed onto? Again, more thoughts than we've got time for this evening. So there's the chapel in Colchester. We know it was like the Tower of London. So fortunately, the Tower of London still have their chapel, which is St John's Chapel in the Great Tower. And had we have had our chapel, had it have been completed, it might have looked something like this. And when they put this raised roof on, these uprights were put in a place where there would have been a column. What we do know, if this was our chapel, it didn't have a ground floor window like the Tower of London's got. But just out of sight here, we have got what is called a little side chapel, which the Tower of London hasn't got. But we're going to leave it there. That's the castle finished with. I want to move on briefly to St John's Abbey and St Butler's Priory. St Butler's Priory we'll finish off on. We'll start off on what we know about St John's Abbey. We know that it was founded by Udo Dapifer, who was the custodian of Cogsta Castle, in 1095, and they started laying out the bricks and everything the following year. St Butler's Priory, we'll come on to. But all we actually have left of St John's Abbey is this gatehouse. It's quite impressive. But although the abbey was founded in 1095, the gatehouse dates from the 1400s. You know, we're not sure exactly when, but certainly probably 1400s. And it's had a bit of a rough life. We know that during the siege of Colchester, as you can see depicted by this lovely drawing by Charles Debenham on the left, that there was a magazine store in there that the royalists had put in there, and the parliamentarians attacked it and they caught the gunpowder light, and it did major damage. And here are the royalists fleeing back into Colchester. And this picture, this is like, 70 odd years later, from Prior's prospect of Colchester, showing the roof off and in a sort of state of ruin, really. As time went on, first of all, if you go inside today, even if you go inside the gateway, you can see on the groins coming down from the fan vaulted roof, there's serious damage on one of them, which is, and it's a very funny shape. It looks like, people think it might have been a cannonball or something had gone through here, but certainly damage incurred at the time of the siege, probably. In Victorian times, it was repaired, rebuilt. They put like a little housey roof on, if you like, and ordinary windows. But later on, as far as I can ascertain, in 1872, it was finally restored to what they think it would have looked. Now, this illustration on the left was an engraving done, believed by James Dean, for Philip Morant's History of Colchester in 1748. And the restoration seems to kind of copy what appeared in Philip Morant's. You will see dates that this was done in the 1840s, but I've got evidence that it still hadn't been done in the early 1850s. It does mention in 1872 that a special wood cutting of it had been presented to the museum, so it tends to think it might have been recently done. And in the museum's latest book on the castle itself, they say 1872, so that's what I'm going with. But what about the priory itself? Now, in the British Library, part of what they call the Cotton documents, there is this manuscript running to about 3 pages, and it's speaking about the Abbey, St John's Abbey, and there's this little illuminated picture which you can see here. So this is the only picture we've got of St John's Abbey. Now, it can't be complete, obviously, because where are the cloisters? Is the chapter house and all the other ancillary buildings? And it's interesting because it's looking from the south. It's looking from the south to the north. So that's going to be the West End. And it shows you a circular tower, which is unusual. A circular tower with an arrow slit window there. Mind you, we know during the Peasants' Revolt, the Abbey was attacked. We know it had a defensive wall all the way around it. So why would they not fortify, perhaps? You can't see from this viewpoint, but there would have been obviously another one of these round towers over here. We've got a central tower, so this would have been a cruciform church, we know. It's got 4 large pinnacles going up here, which looks like a lantern, maybe a lead-lined lantern on top of that, with a weather vane. And here you can see these little chapels, look like chapels, which have been added on here, there. And the style is slightly different. The clear story windows look like they're in pairs with a little plate tracery hole in between them. And at the east end here, again, it almost looks like early English rather than Norman. What we do know is that around the 1130s, so they started this about 1195, it was believed to have been finished at 1115, something like that, but they do believe that it suffered a terrible fire in the 1130s, and lots of repairs were made, and there may have been a bit of rebuilding having taken place, but that's all we've actually got. This is where the cloister should be. So let's have a look at, this is the result of an excavation carried out by the Colchester Archaeological Trust in 2010. And this report in the Colchester Archaeologist 2011. So they'll still have copies of this, hopefully in Roman Circus House. And the reason why they got to do this excavation was because the Garrison Club, which stood here, burnt down. Before they're going to build the new one, they did the excavation. And it was always thought, there's the Gatehouse, it was always thought the church was here somewhere, leaving room for a north cloister. But when they've found this, the church is here. There's not actually enough room for a north cloister here now. So the cloister is here. Whether it was detached from the church, we don't know. It could have been. And also, there was apparently a little, the records describe it as a little hill that had to be moved. Probably a man-made hill. It might have been a Roman barrow or something like that. There was thought at one time, could it be part of an amphitheatre? But that's been discounted now. But apparently they would have moved this hill out of the way and put it down here to make a graveyard. And that's where they later built what is now St Giles Church. There would have been a little Saxon church here, but that went a long time ago. But that's where St Giles Church is. So, and there's the Roman Circus, look. So not far away, the actual Abbey precinct wall would have ran right through the central spina. Might have even incorporated part of it. And this, there's a story, of course, about the abbot. The last abbot at the time of the last abbot at the time of the dissolution, you see down the bottom there, was Thomas Marshall, also known as Beach, either John Beach or Thomas Beach. He was the last abbot, and when time came for him to surrender his abbey, he refused to do so. And apparently when asked whether he would surrender his abbey in 1538, he said to someone, "The king shall never have my house, but against my will and against my heart, for I know by my learning he cannot take it by right and law, wherefore in my conscience I cannot be content." Now, he was eventually arrested. There is a story that he was invited to a feast in the town, and when he was tucking into his feast, he was served with his death warrant and taken off and hanged. Not quite true, although they may have had feasting at that time of day, because this was in October 38, and he may well have, they may well have been celebrating St Dennis Fair where they all got together. But anyway, he was arrested. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London. He was released. Apparently he may have recanted at some stage, saying words to the effect, "Oh, well, you know, if the king had have asked, you know, I would have given it to him." But then apparently he got his faith back again, and he was rearrested. He was taken down to Colchester. He was tried by the Earl of Essex, and he was found guilty of treason. And this is apparently supposed to be a picture of him. There's the abbot, presumably that's the Earl of Essex, leading him off for his execution, and he was said to have been executed on his own gallows. The fact that he was tried for treason beggars the question, was he also drawn and quartered as well? We don't know. But we're going to move on swiftly now to our final section, St Botolph's Priory. Now we're looking at the ruins of the nave. This is a lovely building for architecture and to have a look at. But St Botolph's Priory was founded sometime before 1100. Now prior to that, it seems there was a community of priests serving a parish church on this site, a small parish church. And at some stage, maybe in the 1090s, they decided, certainly one of the priests, whose name was Ernulf, or sometimes pronounced Ainulf. We do have an Ernulf Road, one of the new little roads off Priory Street. Ernulf and a Kentish man, probably from Canterbury, called Norman, got together and decided they would like to take up monastic orders. So it was agreed they would do this, and Norman and one other apparently went to France for a while. They went to Chartres, they went to Beauvais, stayed in both places, learned about the order, came back to Colchester and set about founding St Botolph's Priory. It was dedicated to St Botolph and St Julian. And it was the first house of Augustinian canons in England. And as such, it had authority and preeminence over all the other ones that were later to come, even if they were bigger and more wealthy, because St Botolph's was never very, very wealthy. The latest date is August 1100 when this was founded, because we know that St Botolph's did receive a charter of protection from William II. and he died on the 2nd of August, so it would have had to have been before then. But it wasn't dedicated, it wasn't finished until 1177. So over 70 years it took to build it. And of course, if we look at some of the images, this is the west front with this lovely chevron moulded door here. Like the castle, this dates to about 1150, actually, this one, about 1150, 1160, which would tie in with the fact that it wasn't finished until the 1170s. Because when they built these priories and monasteries, they started at the East End. So they built the altar first, and they would slowly, progressively work to the West End. And by that time, depending how long it takes, architectural styles are evolving and moving. This, I say, this is probably about a third of the West Front, is called. Certainly in Saxon times and Norman times, you always went into churches through the west door. Holy Trinity Church, of course, is a Saxon church, and the main door was on the west. You've got that typical Saxon arrowhead doorway leading right on to Trinity Street. Whereas in later years, of course, you tended to go into churches on the south porch. But this is the western entrance, and there's the remains of a round window. A rose window. This could have been the first window of its kind in England. There's only about 6 left. One of them's at Castle Hedingham. That could have been the very first. And this architecture is amazing. If we go in closer at this blind brick arcading, it's called blind brick arcading because you don't go right through, so you can't walk through. They're filled up. But originally, of course, St Buttles Priory would have been completely plastered on the outside. It may well even have been decorated to some extent. And a few years ago, when they have scaffolding up here and they were doing a drawing of all this, they found some plasterwork still deep in the recesses of some of this blind brick arcading. You could actually walk along inside, along this arcading, and there's little windows you could look through. Here, look. This is the great door. It's also known as the pardon door. And on the right-hand side in particular, some lovely capitals. It looks like one of them, it looks like it depicts a lion or something, but fascinating. You could spend an afternoon here just looking at this lovely architecture. It's called the Pardon Door. In fact, Philip Morant, in his History of Colchester, mentions something called Pardon Sunday. And we know that Pope Paschal II, in the 13th century, granted the prior of St Buttles Priory the right to grant absolution or pardon people's sins in exchange for gifts to the church. But this happened during the Feast of St Denis, which always took place in October. And it took place in October, mainly started off in the Queen Street area. And on the day of the feast and the octave following, so for 8 days, people could bring their gifts to the prior, who you can imagine him sitting outside on a table, maybe collecting gifts and granting absolution for sins committed. On the left-hand side, we're looking down the south aisle from inside. See these massive, great circular Norman columns. You can see one on the right-hand side as well. And like the castle, and like many medieval churches, they've made much use of Roman brick. Even like in the Roman wall, you can see they've tiered the brickwork, 4 layers of brick, 4 stone, 4 brick. That's exactly what you've got in the Roman wall. And an interesting thing is that on this particular, this is what you call the nave arcade. That's the nave arcade. And this is the triforium. That's the triforium arcade. And there would have been another arcade on top here called the clerestory. So you'd have had a triple arcade, the nave arcade. Some of these have fallen through, look, but you've got the nave arcade, triforium, and the clerestory. And at the clerestory level, you'd be able to walk around the whole building within these arches. And if you look carefully here, you can see the doorway, look. See that there? You go up the main stairway, which is in the tower. You could come out at this level to the triforium level, and you may have been able to walk along the back of that as well. You could certainly walk along the front here, look, looking out through those windows on the west front. But there was a doorway also leading on to the clerestory as well. I just want to share a couple of examples, because sometimes if you look at the ruins of St Butler's Priory, it's a job to sort of visualise what's happening. This is Binham Priory. This is just like St Butler's Priory. The reason why we have St Butler's Church, the ruins, is because unlike the Benedictines at St John's Abbey, they didn't allow the public to worship in their church or anywhere in their abbey. That's why St Giles Church was built for the public and for their workers. But the Augustinian rule often would allow the public to worship in the church or part of the church, in the nave of the church. And particularly in Colchester, because apparently if there used to be a parish church there originally, then perhaps that was part of the deal in building the priory. So because of that association with the public, when the dissolution came, although St Butler's Priory lost the cloisters and all the monks, the priors building, canons buildings, because the church was used by the public, it was allowed to remain. And it remained for the next 100 years or so. It was the principal church in Colchester until it was destroyed and brought into its ruinous condition during the siege of Colchester in 1648. And Binham Priory, again, they've got all their remains of their cloisters. Exactly the same happened here. The chancel and the tower and everything was all destroyed, but the nave part of the church remained because it was used by the public. And if we look here at this illustration of Binham Priory, this is like what St Butler's would have been. What we've got at St Butler's now is just this bit here. There would have been transepts, tower, chancel choir, chapter house, and all the rest of it, the cloisters, everything else. And the same at Binham, it's all gone. Same at Colchester, it's all gone. Waltham Abbey, it's all gone. But by looking at Binham, because they've still got their full height, we can get a visualization. What they've done at Binham, look, that is where it would have gone through into the rest of the church. They've literally just filled that up, bricked all that up. But look, there is the nave arcade, triforium, clerestory. And you can just about see the little doorways going from one to the other. So you can walk around the whole building at clerestory level. And that's a reconstruction they've done of the inside. Not only were these priories and monasteries, even Holy Trinity Church, it was plastered. They were plastered on the outside, but on the inside, it was also plastered. And like many churches, it was possibly highly decorated as well as this reconstruction drawing at Binham. And I think we're almost there. I just threw this one in as well. This is Waltham Abbey, again, nave arcade, Norman, see the big round Norman circular columns, the triforium, and the clerestory level. That's what, when you get into St Butler's Priory, that's what you've got to visualise. We would have had that extra height. We do have a few images we can finish on. 1811, that's over 200 years ago. But it doesn't look much different. We've still got half of the round window. It almost looks the same. We can go back a bit earlier, 1724. Now this is interesting. The round window's intact, and we've still got most of this big gable end. There's a pinnacle there, so obviously there would have been one there. And you could start, there's an interesting lean-to here. Not sure what that is, but I do know in one of the wills I've been reading, I think it was a pre-Reformation will, that somebody wished to be buried in the porch of St Butler's Church. So there's no porch there now, but there probably was at one time. And this is the final one. This is a drawing by William Stukeley, the historian, and 1718. And it shows a little cross on there. This one, when he saw, I mean, he might have just put it there, or it may have been there. But this had been in ruin from 1648. The final image was a lovely reconstruction by Peter Frost again, as to how this would have looked if it hadn't have been destroyed during the siege. It certainly could have been described as the Cathedral of Colchester today. Typically Norman, huge towers going up. And on that note, I'm going to bring this to an end, but I just want to share with you some further sources which I think you'll find very interesting. This book in particular, Castles and the Anglo-Norman World, was published in 2016. It's based on a conference at Norwich which took place in 2012, in which Peter Berridge, who was then the manager of the museums, went and presented a paper on Colchester Castle. And I've shared some of the information and images from that conference, but that's well worth getting that book if you'd like to get it. Also, there was a lovely report by the CAG, Cogsta Archaeological Group, on St John's Abbey excavations. They were given a job by the Cogsta Archaeological Trust to see if they can find evidence of an amphitheatre. Basically, that was their brief. But what this does, this is 20 or more pages, 30 pages even. They go through lots of information about the pride. That's definitely well worth reading. The Colchester archaeologist, this one also discusses, you can see the picture there of that church, St John's Abbey Church, and there's another one, not sure of the edition, but these are full of information. This is about Cogsta Castle, how it may have, one explanation, one explanation of how it could have happened. But on that note, I'm going to end. Hope that's been of interest to you, and we'll come to an end now.